Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, of course, thought that I would talk about the most recent news within that of the boxing world. And of course, for those of you that have not really heard, at least unfortunately, the Keith Thurman versus that of the Tszyu fight that was supposed to happen on that on March 30th, between that of Keith Glass Thurman, or one time Thurman, because he's only fought one time within the past several years. Apparently, overall, it's been canceled because of another injury that apparently Keith Thurman has to that of his biceps. Now, it's not very clear, apparently, whether it's a bicep tear or, something like that, but I assume more than likely that it would be because I don't know why else really they would cancel this fight unless it would be something as severe as that. But of course, the March 30th fight between that of Keith Thurman and Tszyu, that's been scrapped, and basically, apparently, they're going to put a new replacement in there. And apparently, from what we're hearing, Al Heyman is going to place that of Sebastian Fundora in there against that of Tszyu, which in my view is a relatively decent fight. I don't think that it's quite the fight of a Keith Thurman versus that of a Tszyu. And a lot of people already, they didn't truly think that that fight even was pay-per-view worthy. I personally didn't mind the fight at all because Keith Thurman versus Tszyu, you have a former welterweight champion, former somewhat unified welterweight champion in the world, versus a new up-and-coming, son of the legend Tszyu at the 154-pound weight class. And whoever the winner of this fight could very potentially be offered that Terrence Bud Crawford fight. And if Keith Thurman ends up winning this fight, it pretty much is the best situation possible because Keith Thurman, of course, once again, he was a former welterweight champion. And if he ends up winning this Tszyu fight, he's going to get a lot of esteem behind him. And I think there's going to be a lot of fans that would be interested in the Terrence Bud Crawford and Keith one-time Thurman fight. And of course, if Tszyu wins, you pretty much win on either side because Tszyu, of course, will be the son of a legend, and his stock is starting to rise, and he's an entertaining fighter to watch for most people because he gets stoppages, at least at certain times, and of course, a lot of people know who Tszyu is, or at least a lot of people did back in the day during the '90s, and overall, he's just a little bit of a fun fighter to watch. So you kind of win either on both sides. Unfortunately, this it kind of stops your steam a little bit. But I will say this. Sebastian Fundora also is another fun fighter to watch. I don't think that he's the most technically gifted fighter that I've ever seen. He pretty much, follows that Antonio Margarito style where he basically just plods forward and tries to basically barrage you with a certain amount of punches and, basically try to tire you out, until you pretty much submit. But this could be a very interesting fight. Sebastian Fundora is coming off of a knockout loss, I believe, to a fighter by the name of Brian Mendoza. Someone that would probably not be looked at as an elite caliber fighter. But Sebastian Fundora is a guy to where when you talk about him, it's probably going to be easier for him to recover in the possible best form for his fight than what it would be that of a technical boxer because Sebastian Fundora pretty much is going to have one game plan, and that's to pressure you, get you with those uppercuts, get you with those hooks, those barrages on the inside, and basically overall try to out-pressure you. So Sebastian Fundora might come in better condition than overall what one might think. It could be very particularly interesting. Once again, I don't think that he's the most technical boxer in the world. He kind of follows that Antonio Margarito style where he just plods forward and tries to brawl with you. But he is about a good 6'3", I believe, which is extremely tall for that weight class. When it comes down to it, he's very lengthy, and he does have power, especially if he's able to accumulate it over within that of the fight. So once again, that's going to be very particularly interesting to see how Tszyu actually could handle that. I don't think that this card really is pay-per-view worthy in my personal view. I might still get it, but that's because I kind of commentate on every fight. But we'll see what ends up happening here. Unfortunately, this fight was scrapped once again because of a Keith Thurman injury. But Keith Thurman is going to kind of talk about his injuries throughout his career as well throughout this video. I thought that I would kind of talk about it. Let's tune in.
Just what do you do? It sucks, man. I mean, we want to do our best. We want to stay at the top, and
Keith Thurman's hairline is moving back all the way to the complete opposite side of his head. He's starting to look like Snoop Dogg with that hairline.
We want to have great performances. We don't want bad articles written about us. So it's it's devastating. Injuries, layoff, setbacks, surgeries. He's been through a lot, and it seems as if it's taken its toll. This is the human nature. This is the human dilemma. Like I said, we don't know what this journey of life is going to provide.
And Keith one-time Thurman, unfortunately, he just appears to be one of those athletes that always gets caught with that of the injury bug for whatever reason. Injuries can kind of happen for a multitude of reasons, whether you're not exercising properly or prepping your body correctly or, maybe not eating healthy enough. But, some guys are just kind of built in that fashion where they they just get injuries and they just can't ever seem to recover. Keith one-time Thurman for boxing is kind of like that. For basketball, of course, is Anthony Davis. Some people just may not be built as, well overall for their particular sport as what they should be. And of course, Keith one-time Thurman, during that little Errol Spence Jr. reign, he did pop out with a lot of injuries. And a certain amount of people thought that it was to potentially avoid that of Errol Spence Jr. And that's also very possible as well. I won't allege that 100% because I would have to do a little bit more research. I was definitely around and watching boxing during that time, but, I'd have to look into it because Keith Thurman, I do believe some of the injuries were legitimate, but do I also believe that some of the surgeries were were overall, taken in order to prolong the inevitable Errol Spence Jr.? Yeah, personally I do. And a lot of fighters will end up doing that where they'll take a surgery or they'll take, an injury overall that wasn't really necessarily needed to be fixed at the current moment in time in order to kind of prolong, that fight, to maybe get them to lose or to maybe not take that fight. For those of you that remember back in the day a while ago, Sugar Shane Mosley, when Floyd Mayweather Jr. called him out, he said that he couldn't take the fight overall because of a loose tooth, so so he ended up, getting that fixed, and of course, I'm sure they did have to get it fixed, but that also is kind of somewhat of an excuse so he didn't have to take that fight. And that's what certain fighters do overall with that of up-and-coming dangerous fighters. And I remember, when I first started watching boxing, kind of within that of the 2010s, because I'm only 25 years old. I'm not, that old. I started watching it, probably about 11, to 12 years ago now. But when it comes out, I remember, the welterweight division, and I remember the new and up-and-coming threat. First, it was Sean Porter, and then, of course, he was able to get defeated by that of a Kell Brook. After that, it was Keith one-time Thurman, after he was able to defeat that of Robert Guerrero and a multitude of other names. And then afterwards, of course, there was the terror of Errol Spence Jr., and Errol Spence Jr. really could not get a fight with anybody. He couldn't get a fight with Danny Garcia. He couldn't get a fight with Keith one-time Thurman. He couldn't get a fight with Kell Brook. He couldn't get a fight with anybody. And Keith Thurman, he was actually, he said overall that he wanted to fight Mayweather, and Mayweather said overall that, okay, I'll let you fight me, but you have to fight that of Errol Spence Jr., and Keith Thurman didn't want to do it. Now, some would debate that Mayweather maybe should have, fought Keith Thurman anyway, but, that just goes to show you also that Keith Thurman, that he knew the threat that Errol Spence Jr. was going to be. And a lot of those guys knew the threat that Errol Spence Jr. was going to be. That's why he couldn't get any fights until he got, the majority of the belts there. So it is what it is. But, Keith Thurman, he definitely does appear to have some injuries. And once again, overall, I'm not going to state that he's avoiding Tszyu here because, he could have not really taken this fight in the first place and just took another welterweight fight. I don't know overall why he would really go through the effort of signing this fight just to completely back out of it, especially a couple weeks before the fight. I mean, some people might believe that he's avoiding him. I'm not going to state that he's avoiding him. I guess you never know, but in my personal view, it probably was a legitimate injury. But Keith Thurman, unfortunately, that's just the way that he's built. Mr. Glass Thurman just is what it is, unfortunately. It's also going to be very interesting to see how Keith Thurman is going to be remembered. Because at one point in time, many people were looking at him as the number one welterweight in the world. And then, of course, later on, he was defeated by the great Manny Pacquiao. But I don't really know how people are really going to remember Keith one-time Thurman and also how his career is going to end up. But we'll see. We'll see, potentially what fight he could potentially be in next. But this is very unfortunate because I was actually looking towards this fight. But the Fundora versus Tszyu fight, that'll be interesting for however long it lasts. I don't think that fight's going to last all 12 rounds. At least, not unless Tszyu is able to last all 12 rounds, because I don't see Fundora more than likely lasting against Tszyu. But you never know. Once again, he's very tall and lanky, and Tszyu, he's starting to become better as a technical boxer, but he will have to be careful in that fight. So we'll see, because Sebastian Fundora, he's from that Antonio Margarito, Jarrett Hurd type of fighter ilk, where basically, they're not the most skilled in the world, but they'll come forward, and because of their size, and some of the power that they have, they can come forward and they can pretty much plod you down. And sometimes they can be successful. We've seen with Jarrett Hurd against Harrisani Lara. Now, I probably would have gave Lara that fight, but it was supremely close. It was very close, in that fight. And Lara, unfortunately, ended up just losing that fight. Margarito, of course, he was a cheater, but, he ended up pulling out some fights of that style. So he's going to have to be very careful in this fight. Fundora is a very awkward, lengthy, and somewhat powerful opponent. He's going to have to be careful. He's going to have to really go to the body in this one. He can't headhunt the whole entire time. Tszyu's going to have to really show, his mettle in this one. He's going to have to really show his boxing level of IQ to see really how high it is. Because Sebastian Fundora is a dude that that you don't really want to fuck up certain things overall, in the ring. And, this is a pretty risky fight. But I think, I think that if Al Heyman had another option, he would have probably not put Sebastian Fundora in there. But also at the same time, I think that it's probably the perfect time, because you don't want him potentially becoming a bigger threat, maybe, or maybe he's just doing it because it's a great fight. But in my view, Sebastian Fundora is a very big threat overall, to certain guys there, even though he's not the most technical boxer, but he's a very big and awkward dude, and I think that Al Heyman would probably want to get more behind that of Tszyu overall than that of Sebastian Fundora. This is somewhat of a relatively dangerous fight for that of Tszyu. I don't think he's an A-grade level fighter, but this is probably the most dangerous B-grade level fighter that you could have fought at that division. So we'll see. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.